My name is Bazad Akdashi with McTrans Center at the University of Florida Transportation Institute. Hosting with me today is Gustavo de Andrade, my colleague, and our guest is Tom Creasey from Caliber Corporation. The reason that we are here today is that we want to share some of our, thoughts and memories about our work at the Highway Capacity Committee within TRB. And Tom is our current chair. Actually, his last day of being chair for this period is today, and he has accepted our invitation to come basically join us remotely. And we have a couple of questions we want to ask him, and also want to see what he thinks about committee, what he thinks about Highway Capacity Manual HCM, and he shares those thoughts. So welcome, Tom.
Thank you for having me.
Maybe let me ask the first question. How did it started for you, getting to know Highway Capacity Committee with TRB, how you got introduced to it, how you joined this group? Maybe let's start with that.
It started for me a long time ago, back in in the mid 1980s. At that time, as a graduate student at the University of Kentucky, one of my textbooks was for my graduate courses was the Highway Capacity Manual, but it was the 1965 version of the manual. So this takes me way back. I was a graduate student. This is the early 1980s when I was at the University of Kentucky, and then I accepted a job offer from the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. So I went there in 1985. Not long after I got there, the 1985 version of the HCM was published, and it is what I refer to as the modern HCM. A lot of things changed, and I won't get into that, but it really was set the new standard for the manual, for the procedures in the manual. In 1988, the Highway Capacity and Quality of Service Committee came to TTI, came to College Station for its mid-year meeting. And this was my first introduction to the committee. Even though I went to TTI for a job, I was also doing some postgraduate work there. So I was technically a graduate student as well. And TTI used the graduate students to host the committee members. They put everybody up in a hotel off campus. And so one of the things I did was drive a 12-passenger van back and forth between the hotel and where we were meeting on campus. And so that's how I got to meet many of the people that have been members over the years. But we as the hosts and graduate students were also allowed to participate in the committee meetings, so subcommittee meetings. And I was fascinated that these members would be debating, discussing, arguing certain elements of the methods. For example, arguing about the signalized intersection method and where you came up with 2 sneakers per cycle. You know, the people that sneak through at the end of the phase as it's transitioning from green to yellow to red, and where that came from. And so all of a sudden, the document became personal. It wasn't just a textbook or a reference book anymore with black ink on pages. It became personal, and I just was overwhelmed. I had never been around anything like that. So I was really impressed and thought, this is just something that I really would like to be a part of. And I was, when I left TTI and went to work in consulting, I was not able to stay connected with the committee until the mid 1990s. And I was working in Florida, and one of the key people and someone who became a close friend of mine, Doug McLeod, was actually on the committee at that time. We were working on a project together, and he was talking about using the HCM methods for planning applications, that he was on the capacity committee, and that they were starting a task force to look at planning applications. And so I was looking for a way to get involved with the committee, and particularly my employer. You had to have a reason for them to send you to TRB. You couldn't just go to TRB because you wanted to. So I was looking for any reason to justify requesting that I get to attend TRB and therefore re-engage with a committee. And that's what happened. Doug said, well, consider yourself on the task force. And so then I went and I went to my employer and said, hey, I'm on this really important task force of the committee that oversees the HCM. And, I need to be able to go to TRB. And they said, okay. So I was able to re-engage. I knew that being on a member of the task force was not going to be enough. So I found a new subcommittee. And at that time, the interchange ramp terminals was a new subcommittee. And so I went to a meeting. The chair of that subcommittee was Jim Powell. And so I approached Jim and said, I would like to be considered to be a member of the subcommittee. And he said, well, let me think about that. He said, you know what, I don't have anybody to take minutes in this meeting. So if you can take minutes, that will certainly help. So I gladly volunteered to take minutes. And, in the end, he appointed me to the committee. But being willing to do, whatever to be actively involved, I think was a big part of that. And so, eventually I was able to attend those, committee meetings regularly, the annual meeting, and I think even a couple of mid-year meetings. And when John Zagir became chair of the committee in 2000, I'd gotten to know John, and I just approached him and said, hey, I'd really like to be on the committee if you have an opening for someone like myself. And so that's what happened. That's how it started for me.
As a member of the committee and later secretary and chair, what was your focus and emphasis?
I realized that I was never going to invent a new method. That there were a lot of, at any, one of these full committee meetings or subcommittee meetings, there were a lot of really smart people in the room who had done a lot of things. But I really felt like, particularly spending, now looking back, 30 years in the consulting industry, that really my emphasis and focus should be on the practitioner, on the application of the manual. The methods aren't any good. The manual's not any good if people don't use it. And so helping people to understand what it's about and apply it correctly was really where I tried to focus my strengths. Those are my strengths, where I tried to focus my efforts, because I could relate to that. And I really thought that is what where my role in the grand scheme of things played. Any group like this, and especially with this committee, the makeup is pretty diverse when you consider educational backgrounds, when you consider just what people do. We have academia, we have research, whether it's private company research or university-based research. We have practitioners, we have public agencies, so there's a mix. And so I thought that the best place for what I could bring to the table, if you will, was really the focus on the application of the manual, and particularly decisions that, are made based on what's done with the manual. As a consultant, I found myself many times, trying to explain the level of service concept to a city council or a planning agency. And so that translation, interpretation and translation was really important to me as well.
Tom, as a chair, what was your leadership style?
I think it's was a lot of it was related to what I just talked about in terms of my focus on the application of the practitioner, but the recognition that there are a lot of people with different backgrounds and different skills and strengths. And so I really wanted to get the best people in the room, number one, and number two, empower them to do what they do best. I had witnessed over the years, different makeups, different leadership styles, and I wanted to be approachable, inviting, encouraging, but also I wanted to make sure that people felt free and empowered to do what they do, to even speak up, in a meeting. I remember, and a lot of this was related to my personal experience. I can remember sitting in some of these meetings with some very big names in the profession and just feeling intimidated, like don't dare say a word. And part of that was my shortcomings, maybe my lack of self-confidence. But I wanted to make sure that we had the best people that we could have, that we had this diversity of experience and expertise, backgrounds, that because certainly the users of the manual reflect that. And I wanted to encourage people and really to stand back, get out of their way. I took a lot from former chair John Zagier, who always used to say, "I'm trying to work myself out of a job." And what he meant by that was, if you empower everyone and enable them to do their job, then you don't have to do some things and you can focus on other things. And so I really believe that putting, people in the right places for leadership within the committee, allowed us to do more because it allowed me as chair to focus on other things. I didn't have to micromanage at all. That would have been a disaster, I think, because we had such good people in different positions. So that was really my style: is get the right people, get good people, the best you can get. Make it clear about what their responsibilities are, make sure that they have the freedom to do what they need to do, and then just get out of the way.
What's being a member of the committee meant to you?
I think professionally it's made all the difference. I don't think there's any one thing that I could have done that has had more impact on my career, professionally and personally as well. A lot of people overlook the personal friendships, that evolve. And I have looked around and seen it, with other people as well that got to know each other through the committee and became friends. But if there's any one thing that I have done that's made a difference professionally, it was, and a big part of that was just having the fear to get out of my comfort zone, because I was very happy and comfortable employed at the Transportation Center at the University of Kentucky. And when I had the chance to be considered for a position at TTI, I was reluctant, but there was a voice inside of me that said, "What are you afraid of?" And it was, if I hadn't gone to TTI, I would not have, been involved with the committee at its mid-year meeting and gotten to know the people in the committee. And, as they say, the rest is history. So professionally, the one thing that I did was listen to that little voice in my head, and really and truly, and it's ironic because this is a volunteer thing, other than me going to for a job change, but everything that's done, unless you get a research contract, to support something in the manual, it's a volunteer thing, and it's been 100% volunteer with me. And so, but yet it's had a more profound impact on my career than anything else I've done.
My next question is, so for past 6 years that you were leading Highway Capacity Committee, what do you think was the biggest contribution of this committee in past 6 years?
There were contributions, and then there were obstacles. Certainly contribution, when you think about everything, we really, so I became a member in 2000. There was a 2000 edition of the manual. There was the 2010 edition of the manual. There was the 6th edition, and now the 7th edition. So I wasn't a part of the committee when the 2000 manual was published, but for the next 3, I was part of that. So certainly those are big achievements. And especially when you look at the HCM 7, the fact, and we went through the changes, with size, the manual getting larger, getting more in depth, covering more topics, and then with the volume 4 online, and those changes. But we were always told that, there really wasn't going to be an electronic manual, that it just wasn't going to happen. And of course now with the 7th edition, we have an electronic manual. So, we've really done a lot. Expanding the methods, particularly in critical areas. We've known the gaps for a long time with the interchange ramp terminals and now alternative interchanges and intersections. We've done a lot more with the pedestrian methods based on the latest research, and that's been a big help. A lot of criticism in the past over the two-lane method. We now have a new two-lane highways method that I think is better. And I could go on. Inclusion of the materials for connected and autonomous or automated vehicles, I think, is huge. And I've said this before. I really think that this is the first document where we actually have something that public agencies can use for looking long-term and making decisions now, decisions on infrastructure investments. So those are great accomplishments. We have had obstacles before that we really hadn't had to deal with historically. And the biggest one, and I heard this, began hearing this when I was secretary of the committee, is that the manual was no longer relevant. The committee was no longer relevant because of simulation primarily, and just software in general. People were just going straight to software, putting numbers in. And yeah, we needed to do that to make it more efficient. But, that had its own perils. But I really took that to heart when I began, because it was apparent to me that really the manual was losing its relevance and the committee was also losing its relevance. So in 2017, when we had our mid-year meeting in Minneapolis, and we, as a committee, we all agreed with that. We were honest with ourselves and said yes. And so we began to lay out that plan for what are we going to do? We allowed ourselves to be self-critical and said, this is what needs to change. And one of the big issues that we had was we had become so overburdened with administration. We had so many subcommittees and task forces. And so everybody was in charge of a subcommittee or task force. And yet we had a limited membership of, 34 members, something like that. And we would have some of these subcommittee meetings, which may have 2 or 3 or 4 people in the room. And so we gave ourselves permission to modernize ourselves and to become, do the things to become more efficient. And we did that by combining many of these subcommittees and ultimately we streamlined ourselves into just 5 subcommittees with some working groups within those. It allowed the committee members to participate in other subcommittee activities. For years, we heard that committee members would say, I'd like to be involved with this subcommittee, but I can't because the subcommittee that I chair meets at that same time. And we had that over and over. So we have essentially restructured, reorganized ourselves so that we could all be involved in everything. Another criticism, and it was well-deserved, is because of that structure, no one knew everything in the manual. The manual had grown and, we had so partitioned ourselves to align with our subcommittees and task forces that it was impossible to know what all the methods are doing. And, certainly back in the old days, if you want to think of it that way, people knew what was in the manual. The manual was smaller, but everybody knew everything that was in it. We had gotten away from that. So we allowed ourselves to be introspective, self-critical, did what we needed to do. And we had some very positive input from ourselves, from others. We made some important decisions at our mid-year meeting in San Diego, and then COVID hit. So just about the time we came up with a plan for how we were going to do things differently, and we began to implement that, then COVID hit, and none of us saw that coming. One of the big things when we are able to meet in person, in addition to the social aspect of it, is that time together is just more productive when people can maybe find an empty room and sit down and figure out a problem with the method, or maybe bounce off some new ideas to one another. And we lost the ability to do that. And yet for 2 years, we were able to punch through that. We were able to take care of our committee business, which included the adoption of the 7th edition and getting that published. We changed to several virtual meetings, and we did more meetings so that we could focus in some of these just on the business decisions at hand, the procedural things that we needed to do to adopt changes or new materials to the manual. So nobody saw this coming. And, the 6 years that I had, looking back on it, there was a lot of upheaval. And I think we were mainly able to keep the boat from tipping over, if you want to use that metaphor. And I think the seas are much calmer now. So I think we're ready to do some big things moving ahead. Certainly Bastian Schroeder as the new chair will be a strong leader, a good leader, I think the right leader for the next chapter of whatever comes with the committee and the manual. We haven't forgotten some of those things that we identified back in 2017, when we said we need to change things. And I think it would be good to maybe reflect on those again so that we can make sure that we haven't forgotten anything, because I think that we still have the issue with the manual not being as relevant as it once was. We have to remember there's no other document out there that has 70 years of research that's been peer reviewed, backed by data, that we just we have a tendency to go straight to simulation sometimes, but we can't forget everything that's gone into the manual. And that's really, it's been the gold standard since it was originally published, and it should remain that way. So I hope that this moving forward, that this committee will not forget that.
What is HCM's role in the years to come?
Good question. I think we have solved one of the issues with the electronic version. We've had a new area of focus now in that, and this is based on the criticism that we have heard over the last few years, is that it's too much. It's too large. The methods are too complex, and that it's impossible to, and in fact, some of the methods, the full documentation is only included as comments in the computational engine code, which is really, in retrospect, and that template was set years and years ago, and a lot of it had to do with page limitations in the manual. And this is actually before we went to volume 4 being electronic. But all of that rolled up together now, we've got something that it's so large, it's unmanageable if it's just printed pages on a disk. So, and our methods, are some of them just too complex? Should we have maybe a point of divergence that says, if you need to know this, if you need to answer these questions from an analysis, then you can do a very general planning application. If you have a little more input, you can get a refined estimate of that. But if you need to really get into the details, you should use simulation maybe, or there is this full complex method with all of the documentation. But what part of that should be in the manual, and where, and how should we approach that, and what methods to which would that apply? Signalized intersections is the one that we've been discussing most recently, but there are others. So yeah, that's our big question. Our big challenge right now is what needs to be in the manual. Do people not read it now? Nobody really picks it up and reads it anymore. But do people not even go to it as a reference because a method requires a couple hundred pages to document fully or something like that. Is that, but, these methods have grown in complexity and in scope because the user community said, well, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do that. We used to have to say, if we're oversaturated, basically you have to do something else. Well, we addressed that issue by going to multi-period analysis and revising the methodology. So now that we could account for that unmet demand that gets carried over to the next analysis period. We couldn't do that before 2010, I think it was. We basically had to put a caveat there. Maybe it was 2000. Basically, we had to put a caveat that said if your V over C greater than 1.2, don't trust your answer because we can't compute it. And essentially that had to do with the unmet demand and how do you figure that into the calculation. So going forward, that's going to be the big challenge, is how do we right size the manual for the need for the application? And the stuff that's really complex, it needs a really complex answer. If the decision is made to do something deterministic and to use the method in the HCM, where do you put that? How do you document it? All those questions. So, boy, the work is never done when you just publish a new manual. There's always the next, stack of challenges that have been waiting to be addressed. And I think that's where we are now moving forward.
So, Tom, is there anything else that you would like to share with us and our audience?
I think really that that addresses all the issues, the challenges. My reason for being on the committee. It goes back to that first meeting. It became personal then. We'd all gone through college, and at least me personally, I'd never known anybody that wrote a textbook. They were just, words printed on pages with diagrams. And so all of a sudden, someone who wrote this chapter, that person was sitting in front of me and justifying why they made this assumption going into a method. And, that was just, I had never been around that before. And I really just thought that it was something very, very cool. And so that began my infatuation with the all things related to HCM. It's been an honor. It really has been an honor to be part of it. I don't know if everybody has considered it that way. Maybe for some people that have been members in the past, it was just another TRB committee. But it certainly, I looked at it differently, and I was honored. I never even dreamed about being chair. I just hoped someday that maybe I could have a chance to become a member. And and it was actually TRB has its rules, and so you're supposed to be off after 9 years. We got an extra year when Rick Dowling was chair because the HCM 2010 was in publication, and so I was supposed to rotate off in 2010. And of course, that was the year that Lily Eleftheriadou took over as chair, and she approached me and said, "Would you consider being secretary?" And I said, "Absolutely, I will," because I really didn't want that to be over at that time. And as it turned out, I had 12 more years of being on the committee in front of me. So, it's been an honor, privilege, a blessing, all of that. But, the TRB rules are good because you really need to refresh things. There need to be new ideas, new blood, if you will. I really like the makeup of this committee now. There's really, the things that we were trying to accomplish, and including the new people that are rotating on, valuable contributors. It's a shame that every 3 years you have to lose some of your members. But again, like I said, that's a good thing in a lot of ways. And so I just really like this committee makeup, the leadership that's on there. I expect to see great things. And as I've been saying, now I will see those from the back of the room and not the head of the table. but that's fine with me. Thank you for doing this, Bazad and Gustavo and Mitch. Is it? I really appreciate it. It just, give me the opportunity to reflect on it a little bit, and it'll always be, have a special place in my heart. And so I'm fortunate that I will have the opportunity to stay connected and stay involved, but won't have as much to worry about now. It's somebody else's.
Thank you very much for your time, Tom.
Hey, thanks a lot. Good to see you. And
Good to see you, Tom. Thank you.
hopefully I'll get to Gainesville sometime, but certainly
Please let us know when you are here.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you guys at mid-year meeting for sure.
I'll do. Bye.
All right, thank you.